Hello, it is Alex here, also known as Defaultsound, and welcome to another video in my tutorial series for Blender real-time rendering. Today we're going to be taking our first step into Blender by looking at the viewport and how to control the viewport, as well as look at some setup options that we have available in Blender. Now, the first time you open Blender, you will probably be a bit overwhelmed with the amount of buttons and things going on in the viewport. And I can tell you from experience, this was a bit overwhelming for me too, all those many years ago. But I have to tell you, if you can get past the scariness of the UI, there's a lot of reward behind using Blender as a 3D modeling application. So the first thing we're going to do is change some user preference settings that I think will benefit you users who are starting out using Blender, or maybe switching from a more commercial program also available out there. So the first thing we're going to do is not going to touch anything at all. We're going to click up in the top left hand side the File button, and we're going to come down to User Preferences. So you click on that and you'll get another window come up. So the first thing that we're going to go to is we're going to click on our System tab. We're not going to really touch cycles at the moment, but it would be a good idea to change our compute device to CUDA, and this is just to make sure we utilize the graphics card in our computer if we ever do some offline rendering, which we may do in a later date. So we're going to set that now for future reference. So that's all we're going to touch for now in the System tab. We'll then come over to our add-ons. Now there's one add-on that's been released recently in the more recent versions of Blender. However, it's not on by default, and this is a sort of user-friendly thing that we can use to quickly go into different modes. So if you type in this search box up here, we can type in Pi, and we're going to enable Pi Menus Official, and I'll show you later what that is. But we're going to click on this little checkbox, and that will enable our add-on. Okay, that's all we're going to enable for our add-ons. And for our input, I'm going to recommend you change the select button to left. Now this is a problem by default. It's not a problem, but by default Blender uses the right mouse button to select. And for many years I did use the right mouse button to select, and I got used to it. However, there was a bit of debate in the community a couple of years back to whether this should be changed to left click, as synonymously with other software packages, left click is the default mouse button to select things. And I started using Maya 3 years ago, and that software uses all left click, and I was trying to go backwards and forwards between Maya and Blender, and I found it a lot easier to just change this to the left mouse button, so I wasn't trying to relearn all these tools, and it just helped me. So if you're starting out and you feel familiar with using the left mouse button, I recommend we check the left mouse button. What we can also do is, I think it's somewhere here. Ah, there it is, sorry. Right under my nose. In the Input tab up here, we have this Emulate Keypad. Now, this is, as it says here in the tooltip, this is useful for laptops. So if you don't have a full keyboard with a numpad, you may want to select this button. So then your number keys 1 to 0 will now act as the numpad, and this will be useful later on, and I'll show you why. But I'm not going to enable that because I have a full keyboard available to me. So that's about it. I don't think there's any settings we have to change in any of the other tabs. Yeah, that should be good. So we're going to click Save User Settings, and now all those settings should be saved every time you open Blender. Just double check that. There we go. Okay. So let's start off by looking into the viewport. So by default, Blender has this default scene set up with a cube, a light, and a camera. Really, we don't really need these objects by default, as we can add them back in later on. So I recommend deleting this And what we can do is we can save a default state that will appear every time you open Blender. So we're going to select our camera by a left mouse button clicking. We can hold shift on the keyboard and select multiple objects in the scene by a mouse button clicking again, and we can select the light as well. Now here's our first thing I have to mention. A lot of Blender's inputs are made by using shortcuts. There's often at times not a visual button to press to delete something. They're trying to expose this a bit more on the left panel here. Some buttons are available, but a lot of the functions are hidden under shortcuts, and using shortcuts will help you speed your workflow up anyway. So it's highly advisable to use shortcuts in your workflow. So what we're going to do is learn our first shortcut, and that is delete. So delete is the X key by default. So we're going to hit X, and every time you make an option or complete an action, a little window will appear. If you move your mouse before you click it, that window will disappear, but all you have to do is press the shortcut again and that window will appear. So we're going to press X and then we're going to click delete, and that will clear our scene. Now you may notice there's this little cursor here floating around space, and if you right click with the settings we've got, that will move the 3D cursor, and this 3D cursor is useful later on for positioning where we want to place objects. So, but if you want to reset this, we're going to learn our next shortcut. That is Shift C. So Shift C will snap the 3D cursor back to the origin. So Shift C. Now, before we go any further, before we learn how to rotate and stuff, we want to save this state. We want to save the scene we have, or the settings we have set up. So we're going to go up to our file menu again, and what we're going to do is we're going to click Save Startup File. So it says here, make the current file the default.blend file, and that includes preferences and any other settings you can actually set everything to be this startup file if you so wish it to be. So we're going to click that, and we're going to click OK. You sure you want to do that? And we're going to yep, Save Startup File. So now if we go File, New, and reload the startup file, we can then load this scene again.